There comes a time in your life when you'll look around and realize the love turned cold. The smiles disappeared. The people you once laughed with, they don't even look at you the same anymore. You start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? You replay the conversations, you examine your steps. You beg your soul for answers. But listen to me right now. It's not always about what you did. Sometimes it's about who you've become. The truth is, when you start rising, when you start evolving, when your spirit starts glowing differently, not everyone around you can handle that light. Some people loved you when you were broken, when you were lost, when you needed them. But the moment you find your power, the moment you stop begging for crumbs, the moment you step into your purpose, the hate shows up. Let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Their hate is not your failure, it's confirmation of your growth. It's a reflection of the battle going on inside them, not inside you. So don't shrink, don't apologize, don't stop, because the hate, the silence, the distance, it all has a deeper meaning, and today we're going to talk about it. There's a strange shift that happens when you begin to find your voice. At first, people celebrate you, they cheer for your healing, they applaud your breakthroughs, but the moment you begin to own your power, not borrow it, not apologize for it, that celebration turns to suspicion. They look at you different, not because you hurt them, but because you stop letting them lead your steps. You see, control is a quiet addiction in relationship. It hides behind love, behind concern, behind so-called advice. But the moment you stop following orders that were never yours to follow, suddenly you're the villain in someone else's story. And it stings, doesn't it? It hurts when the ones you gave the most to suddenly turn cold, all because you refuse to let them pull your strings. But that pain is proof that you're breaking free, proof that you're no longer for sale to people who only loved you when they could mold you. Remember this, people don't hate the real you. They hate that the real you can no longer be tamed, boxed in, or silenced. What they hate is that your healing came without their permission, that you didn't ask them for approval to grow, that you finally started saying no and didn't explain why, that you chose peace over pleasing, that you chose boundaries over begging. See, they were never afraid of your weakness. They were afraid of your strength, because your strength meant they no longer had leverage. You started standing up straighter, talking clearer, smiling without guilt. And that power you walked into, it terrified the people who once sat at the control panel of your life. They used to push your buttons and watch you break. Now you're walking away without turning back. And to them, that feels like betrayal. But you didn't betray them. You rescued yourself. You reclaimed what they had no right to hold. You not being selfish, you're being free. And freedom always exposes who was really for you and who was just enjoying the ride. It was never about love. It was about access. The more access they had to your emotions, the more they felt validated. The more they could manipulate your moods, the more powerful they felt. But now you've put a lock on that access. Now you don't answer every message. You don't engage in every argument. You don't rush to fix things that weren't your fault. And that shift, that's what they hate. They don't miss you. They miss the control they had over you. The control to make you feel small when they needed to feel big. The control to guilt you into silence. But now you're quiet for a different reason. Not because you're scared, but because you're centered. You don't react like you used to. You don't chase. You don't explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And their silence is loud to them. It screams that their grip on you is gone. And for people who depend on control, that silence is unbearable. They'll call you difficult. They'll say you've changed. They'll claim you forgot where you came from. But the truth is, you remembered who you were before they taught you to be small. You remembered that your worth isn't tied to their validation. You remembered that peace isn't something you have to earn through suffering. You didn't change to hurt them. You changed to heal you. And the people who truly love you, they'll clap for that healing, even if it means they get less of you. But the ones who are only there for what they could extract, they'll resent the new you, because the new you has boundaries. The new you won't be manipulated with tears, won't be swayed by guilt, won't be led by fear. And that's where the hate creeps in. Not because you wronged them, but because you finally started doing right by yourself. You see, the hate is not a reflection of your flaws. It's a reaction to your freedom. And I know it still hurts. It hurts when someone flips on you without warning, when someone you trusted suddenly turns bitter, cold, distant. It makes you question yourself. Did I do something wrong, you ask? But let me speak to your soul. No, you didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped playing a role you outgrew. You stopped apologizing for being whole. And now their comfort zone feels threatened because your light doesn't just shine, it reveals. And what it reveals is uncomfortable. It reveals their insecurities, their inability to change, their need for control. They can't say it out loud, so instead they criticize your growth. They mock your confidence. They twist your words. But all that noise, that's fear talking. That's envy. That's the voice of someone who wishes they could change like you did, but doesn't have the courage to. Some people build their identity on being needed. The moment you stop needing them, they feel like they've lost their place in your life. But what they don't realize is you never needed their control, you needed connection. Genuine, loving, respectful connection. But if connection only came with strings attached, that wasn't love. That was a leash. And now you've cut the leash. You're walking in purpose. You're waking up with clarity. You're smiling without asking for permission. And they can't handle that because they no longer have the power to dim your light. Your self-worth is no longer tied to their praise. Your identity is no longer shaped by their opinions. And that level of independence scares the ones who only felt powerful when you felt powerless. Don't let that scare you back into submission. Stand firm. Walk bold. You owe no one an apology for finally valuing yourself. What they call attitudes, what they label as cold, what they whisper about as change. That's just their way of processing the fact that you're no longer under their thumb. They can't predict you. They can't manipulate you. They can't guilt trip you into places you've outgrown. You've become emotionally unavailable to chaos. And to those who fed off your weakness, that's a threat. They hate that your healing has become louder than your pain, that your peace speaks louder than your panic, that your decisions are no longer based on fear, but on purpose. And when people can no longer control the version of you that kept them comfortable, they'll try to control the narrative about you instead. Don't fall for it. Don't argue with it. Keep walking. Because your consistency will speak louder than their gossip. Your integrity will outlive their bitterness. And your peace, that's your proof that you made the right decision. Sometimes the hate is just a mask, a cover-up for disappointment. They're not really mad at you. They're mad that they couldn't keep you small. They're mad that they didn't finish the story. They're mad that you became something they never expected, that you found strength in places they thought would break you. You see, when someone builds their confidence off your insecurity, your healing becomes a threat to their survival. They don't know who they are without you needing them. So they lash out, they create distance, they throw shade, but don't take it personal. It's not your job to stay broken so someone else can feel whole. Your light is not too bright. They've just been sitting in the dark too long. And if your glow disturbs their shadows, let it. Don't dim yourself. Don't shrink. Keep rising. Because your life is not meant to be lived under the weight of someone else's comfort. And finally, remember this. There will always be people who resent the moment you stop being their puppet. But that resentment is not your responsibility. Your growth was not an act of rebellion, it was a rescue mission. You went back for the pieces of yourself you buried to keep the peace. You picked up the dreams you laid down so others could sleep at night, and now that you found your voice, your power, your path, they call it betrayal. But deep down they know what it really is. It's liberation. It's you walking into a season where your joy isn't tied to anyone's leash, where your identity isn't on auction for approval, where your peace isn't negotiable. That's not betrayal, that's becoming. So let them hate, let them talk, let them watch. Because the version of you that no longer bows to control, that version is unstoppable. And that's the version the world needs now. Your growth is a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. When you evolve, you force people to see their own lack of motion. You don't even have to say anything. Your silence, your discipline, your elevation, it speaks volumes. It exposes what they've been ignoring in themselves. You start showing up early. You start setting boundaries. You start turning your pain into power. And instead of being inspired, they feel threatened. Not because you're hurting them, but because you're changing and they're not. That gap between who they are and who you've become makes them uncomfortable. And instead of doing the inner work, they project their frustrations onto you. They say, you're acting brand new. They say you think you're better. But it's not pride driving you, it's purpose. You didn't grow to show off, you grew to survive. You outgrew the version of you that was always available, always shrinking, always apologizing. And that shift doesn't sit well with those who are still sitting in the same place, making the same excuses, recycling the same patterns. Your progress doesn't need to be loud, but to them, it's deafening. You started choosing your peace over their approval. You stopped entertaining the drama. You stopped letting fear decide your future. And suddenly, people who never clapped for you before have a lot to say. They watch your every move, not because they're inspired, but because they're confused. Confused at how someone with the same struggles, the same pain, the same background, broke the cycle while they stayed stuck in it. See, your growth didn't come with fanfare. It came with isolation, with late nights, with self-doubt, with sacrifice. And now that you're rising, they want to act like it was easy. They want to discredit the tears they never saw, the work they never understood. And deep down, it stings them. Because every win you get reminds them of the effort they didn't make. It reminds them of the potential they ignored. That's not your fault. But it becomes your burden when they turn their envy into bitterness. They stop calling, they stop supporting. Not because you changed, but because you dared to do what they were too afraid to. You walked away from the same comfort zone they're still stuck in. And now they whisper about you like you betrayed something sacred. But what they don't realize is you didn't betray anyone. You just refused to stay in a place that kept you small. And when you rise, you reveal. You reveal the habits they've been protecting, the laziness they've been defending, the fears they've been masking. That's why your presence suddenly feels like a problem to them. It's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's because your very existence makes them question everything they've settled for. And that questioning, that discomfort, that's what turns love into resentment. They want the old you, the one who never challenged them, the one who played it safe, the one who stayed silent so others could feel loud. But you're not that person anymore. You've evolved, you've stretched, you've healed, and healing is loud, even in silence. Your peace carries a power they don't know how to match. And instead of rising with you, they'd rather tear you down, because it's easier to criticize your growth than confront their own stagnation. They don't hate your success. They hate what your success says about their failure to move. Your discipline exposes their procrastination. Your healing highlights their avoidance. Your glow reminds them of the light they dimmed in themselves a long time ago. And instead of saying, teach me, they say, you think you're better. They twist the story to fit their comfort. Because if they can label you as arrogant, they don't have to look inward. If they can call you distant, they don't have to admit you outgrew the conversations that went nowhere. If they can say you've changed, they don't have to deal with the fact that they haven't. And yes, it hurts. It hurts when the people you love can't celebrate the best version of you. It hurts when they'd rather sit in judgment than cheer you on. But that pain, it's the cost of evolution. Not everyone is meant to grow with you. Some people were only assigned to the chapter you've already closed. And when you outgrow the environment that shaped your wounds, you also outgrow the people who learn to love you in brokenness. Sometimes they don't want you to grow, not because they're evil, but because your growth leaves them behind. They got comfortable with you being predictable, with you being available, with you being stuck. And now that you're moving different, they feel abandoned, they feel rejected, but they never ask why you had to grow. They never ask what it took for you to choose healing over habits, what it cost you to choose growth over greed. They don't see the nights you cried yourself into clarity, the moments you had to forgive people who never apologized, the seasons you had to walk alone, misunderstood, mislabeled, and now that your fruit is showing, they judge the tree, but they never studied the roots. Never studied the storm you survived. Never saw the pruning it took to become this version of you. That's why you can't let their opinion distract you. They weren't there in your desert, so they don't get to define your promised land. Their comfort is not your assignment. Your growth is not up for debate. Growth isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's losing friends without explanation. It's outgrowing conversations you once enjoyed. It's sitting at tables and realizing you no longer fit. It's having to dim your excitement so others don't feel insecure. And yet you keep rising, you keep healing, you keep moving forward, even when it feels lonely. And that movement, that scares people who've been standing still for years. It forces them to confront questions they've been avoiding. Why haven't I changed? What am I still clinging to? What am I afraid of? But instead of digging into those questions, they turn on you. They make you the problem. Because blaming you is easier than facing themselves. And in their eyes, you're no longer familiar. You're no longer controllable. You're no longer digestible. You're unpredictable now, free now, powerful now, and power in the hands of someone who once bowed low. That's intimidating to people who built their confidence on your brokenness. They don't talk about the hours you spent in silence healing from things no one knew about. They don't see the discipline behind the scenes, the sacrifices, the choices, the nights you wanted to quit but didn't. All they see is the outcome, and they compare it to their inactivity, and it burns. Because deep down they know they could have changed too. But they didn't, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. And now your life stands as a living testimony to what's possible. That's why they avoid you. That's why they downplay your progress. That's why they question your motives. Because it's easier to attack the messenger than receive the message. And your life is the message. Every step you take forward reminds them of the steps they never took. Every door you walk through reminds them of the ones they never knocked on. You don't have to speak it, your presence preaches it. You are proof that pain doesn't have to be a prison, that cycles can be broken, that comfort zones are just cages with soft walls. And still you rise. Even with the shade, even with the side eyes, even with the subtle comments meant to knock you off center, you keep growing. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Because you finally realize that staying small doesn't make others feel more whole. It just keeps you empty. You realize that your growth is not a betrayal. It's a breakthrough. And anyone who feels attacked by your healing was benefiting from your brokenness. Let that sink in. Because people who love you don't fear your change, they support it. People who love you don't compete with your progress, they celebrate it. But when people are committed to being stuck, your momentum feels like rejection. And you can't carry that guilt. You can't shrink to make others feel safe. You weren't created to be average just so someone else could feel superior. You've got a calling, a light, a fire. And it's not meant to be caged by someone else's. So keep going. Keep healing. Keep choosing the hard path, even when it's lonely. Because your growth will offend people who chose stagnation. And that's okay. You weren't born to fit in with the ones who fear movement. You were born to break patterns, to shift atmospheres, to rise where others sink. And yes, they'll talk. They'll criticize. They'll distance themselves. But don't mistake that distance as a sign you're doing wrong. That distance is confirmation you're doing what they couldn't. You're doing the work. You're climbing the mountain they said was impossible. And every step up, you're becoming a better version of yourself. Don't look down. Don't apologize. Don't stop. Because someone out there is watching your journey and realizing they can grow too. Your growth isn't just for you. It's a beacon. And while some may resent it, others will rise because of it. Keep being that light. When someone lashes out, criticizes, or tries to tear you down for no clear reason, it's often not about you. It's about them. People who haven't dealt with their own pain tend to project that pain onto others. It's a psychological reflex. Instead of sitting with their own wounds, they try to make others feel what they don't want to acknowledge. That's why you'll find yourself confused when someone gets angry at your happiness or uncomfortable with your peace. Your presence doesn't hurt them, what you represent does. You might symbolize the healing they haven't pursued, the confidence they don't have, or the freedom they never claimed. So rather than face their own inadequacies, they make you the target. It's easier to criticize than to confront the pain inside. That's why they attack your light, because it reveals their darkness. They mock your progress because it highlights their stagnation. And when you try to understand or help them, they might even twist it and accuse you of being arrogant or fake. Don't fall into the trap of internalizing their bitterness. It's not your fault they're hurting, and it's not your job to carry the burden of their unresolved issues. Protect your peace. Their pain is theirs to fix. It can be disorienting when someone close to you starts acting differently just because you're doing better. At first, you might think you've done something wrong. You'll start replaying conversations in your head, overanalyzing your tone, your words, your actions, anything to explain their shift. But the truth is, you didn't hurt them. You just triggered something in them. People who haven't healed often see your growth as a mirror they can't avoid. They see you shining and it reminds them of the light they've abandoned within themselves. They see you succeeding and it pokes at the belief they hold that life never works out for them. So instead of being happy for you, they find ways to undermine or dismiss your progress. They'll say you've changed, but really they're mad you're not staying small. They'll say you're selfish, but really they resent your boundaries. They'll say you're acting different, but what they mean is you're not tolerating their emotional projection anymore. You don't need to shrink to make them feel comfortable. If your light makes someone uncomfortable, it says more about the shadows they've yet to face than it does about anything you're doing wrong. You'll notice that the people who project the most pain are often the loudest in their judgments. They criticize what they don't understand and attack what they secretly desire. They might call you too emotional, too ambitious, too sensitive, too confident, not because you are, but because they aren't. Your traits highlight the areas they've neglected in themselves. And rather than work on their own healing, they try to invalidate your wholeness. It's not personal, it's protective. They use judgment as a shield. If they can discredit you, they don't have to look inward. If they can make you question yourself, they don't have to confront their own emptiness. They'll talk behind your back, roll their eyes at your progress, and even mock your joy, not because you deserve it, but because it challenges the lies they tell themselves. Lies like people like me don't succeed, or being vulnerable is weak, or no one really changes. Your life disproves those beliefs, so instead of expanding their mindset, they attack yours. Recognize it for what it is: a defense mechanism. Their projection is not your reality. Don't absorb their pain. You're not their scapegoat, and you're not responsible for the healing they refuse to do. Sometimes people aren't mad at you. They're mad at what you remind them of. You remind them of missed chances, lost dreams, or the courage they never built. You remind them that healing is possible, and that's terrifying for someone still clinging to their wounds. Your confidence triggers their insecurity. Your peace disrupts their chaos. And they won't say it outright, but their actions will reveal it. They'll go quiet when you share your wins. They'll find flaws in your decisions. They'll downplay your growth with passive-aggressive comments. They're not just being critical. They're bleeding on you from wounds you didn't cause. The pain they carry distorts their vision. So they see your strength as a threat instead of an inspiration. They see your boundaries as rejection instead of self-respect. They twist your intentions to fit the narrative that everyone is against them. And the more you shine, the more they feel the weight of their own self-abandonment. But you can't save someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. You can love them, but you don't have to let their pain seep into your spirit. Your job isn't to dim your light. It's to keep shining, even if they refuse to see it clearly. Projection often wears the mask of advice, concern, or even love. People will tell you they're just looking out for you while projecting their fears onto your choices. They'll say things like, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Not because they know better, but because they're afraid to take the same risks. They'll discourage you from trying something new, not because it's impossible, but because they never had the courage to do it themselves. They'll warn you not to trust people because they were once betrayed. They'll tell you not to aim too high because they settled. And if you're not careful, you'll start internalizing their limitations. You'll confuse their fear for wisdom. You'll start shrinking to fit into their comfort zone. But what you have to remember is that someone else's pain is not your compass. Their fear is not your forecast. They might mean well, but unresolved trauma twists perception. Don't let their broken lens become your worldview. You are allowed to outgrow their mindset. You are allowed to dream beyond their fears. You are allowed to live a life they never imagined. Their pain is real, but it doesn't get to dictate your direction. One of the clearest signs of projection is when someone overreacts to something small. You say no politely, and they act like you've rejected their entire being. You express a boundary, and suddenly you're labeled toxic. This isn't about your behavior. It's about their unresolved pain being triggered. Your no brings back every abandonment they never healed from. Your strength reminds them of times they felt powerless. And rather than reflect, they react. They inflate the moment, twist the story, and cast you as the villain. Not because you are, but because they need someone to carry the blame. It's easier for them to be the victim than to take responsibility. That's how projection works. It shifts the emotional burden onto you so they can avoid carrying it themselves. But don't let their emotional dumping become your emotional diet. You don't have to take on their anger, their bitterness, or their story. You can stand firm in your truth, even when it's misunderstood. You can stay kind without becoming a sponge for someone else's pain. Protecting your peace doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. And consciousness is what separates emotional maturity from emotional projection. The most heartbreaking part of dealing with projection is when it comes from people you care about deeply. Family, friends, partners, people you once felt safe with. It hurts to realize that their love had conditions shaped by their own pain. You begin to see how their unresolved wounds have been spilling into the relationship for years. Maybe your achievements made them feel inadequate. Maybe your healing highlighted their pain. Maybe your boundaries disrupted the dynamic they depended on. And as painful as it is, it's also clarifying. You start to see that their reactions weren't personal. They were patterns. Patterns rooted in childhood trauma, unspoken insecurities, or unmet needs. It's not about blaming them. It's about understanding them without carrying them. You can hold compassion in one hand and boundaries in the other. You can love people and still refuse to be their emotional punching bag. Because love without accountability becomes a cycle of harm. And the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to stop participating in the projection. Let them deal with their own shadows. Your light isn't the problem. It's the invitation they keep refusing to accept. Eventually, you'll learn to see projection not as an insult, but as information. It tells you more about where someone is emotionally than where you've gone wrong. It reveals their inner battles, their unresolved pain, their unspoken fears. And once you stop taking it personally, you gain power. You stop reacting and start observing. You recognize when someone's tone shifts, not because you've done something, but because they've been triggered by their own story. You begin to understand that their criticism is often just a reflection of their self-judgment. Their coldness is a shield for vulnerability. Their anger is unprocessed grief. And when you see it for what it is, you no longer get pulled into their emotional chaos. You can choose peace over participation. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can walk away from arguments designed to make you feel small. That's not detachment, it's discernment. You're not abandoning them, you're choosing not to abandon yourself. Projection loses its power when you no longer play the part they've written for you. And in that clarity, you find freedom. At the end of it all, remember that someone else's pain, when projected, can feel loud, but it doesn't define your truth. Their hurtful words, passive aggression, or cold demeanor are all signs of inner turmoil they haven't faced. Don't let their pain shape your identity. You are not what their wounds say you are. You are not too much, too proud, too selfish, too soft. You're simply becoming more of who you truly are, and that threatens the part of them still pretending. Let them wrestle with their pain. It's not your job to fix what you didn't break. You can hold space for understanding without holding their emotional weight. You're allowed to walk in joy while others stumble through sorrow. And you're allowed to love yourself enough to not absorb the damage they deflect. Projection only lands when you make room for it. Choose instead to be grounded in your truth, centered in your healing, and secure in your identity. You'll see their pain, but you won't become it. That's growth. That's freedom. That's power. When you walk into a room and people straighten up, shift their tone, or suddenly become aware of their actions, that's not by accident. Your presence demands accountability. It's not about being loud or dominant, but about carrying yourself in a way that reminds people of their own values, responsibilities, and intentions. Some individuals are so aligned with integrity, clarity, and self-discipline that just being around them becomes a mirror. When your actions are consistent with your words, when you stand firm in your truth and move with purpose, you force people to either rise to that standard or retreat. It's not always comfortable, and it's not always welcomed. In fact, it can often trigger resistance or avoidance. That's because people who are hiding from responsibility don't like to be reminded of what they're avoiding. They don't like to be confronted with someone who is fully engaged in the work they keep postponing. Your consistency exposes their inconsistency. Your strength reveals their weakness. Your focus highlights their distractions. This isn't arrogance and it's not judgment, it's simply a reflection. Your energy can't be faked, and those who are out of alignment with themselves will always feel uneasy around someone who is in alignment. When people realize they can't manipulate you, when they see that you won't entertain gossip, drama, or excuses, they start to treat you differently. Some will respect it, others will resent it, but everyone will notice it. That's the power of your presence. You become a boundary without speaking. You become a standard without setting rules. People know they can't just come to you with nonsense because they've learned you won't co-sign their mess. They know you won't sugarcoat the truth or play along with lies. And so when you show up, they adjust. They either match the frequency or remove themselves. Your presence silently challenges people to check themselves, to reflect, to be better. It makes them think before they speak, act, or complain. Not because you're intimidating, but because you represent something solid in a world full of instability. You've chosen growth, and that choice comes with a cost. It demands that others confront their own stagnation. That's why some people disappear from your life the moment you start evolving. It's not personal, it's spiritual. Your elevation creates discomfort for those who prefer comfort over progress. The truth is, not everyone can handle being around someone who holds themselves accountable. When you no longer tolerate mediocrity, chaos, or passive behavior, you naturally expose who's been surviving off those patterns. Your presence becomes a disruptor. It dismantles illusions. And that's uncomfortable for those who have built their identities around avoidance, excuses, or blaming others. You don't even have to say anything directly. Just the way you move through life, focused, intentional, grounded, creates a silent expectation. You become proof that it's possible to live differently, that it's possible to take control, take ownership, and live with purpose. And some people aren't ready for that kind of truth. They'd rather remain in denial. They'd rather be surrounded by others who reinforce their comfort zones. So they'll pull away from you, distance themselves, or try to diminish your light to justify their own shadows. But that's not your problem. Your only job is to keep showing up in your truth, keep doing the inner work, and keep being that presence that shifts the atmosphere without even trying. When you commit to growth and responsibility, you stop enabling others. You stop giving energy to conversations that go in circles. Stop entertaining excuses dressed up as reasons. And stop allowing people to dump their emotional baggage on you without taking ownership. That shift can feel isolating at first. People may call you cold, distant, or self-centered. But it's not selfish, it's self-aware. You've learned the difference between helping someone grow and holding someone up while they refuse to move. There's a line between compassion and codependency, and your presence becomes that line. When you stop allowing others to drain you with their chaos, they'll accuse you of changing. And they're right, you have. You've changed for the better. You've chosen accountability over enabling. You've chosen peace over performance. You've chosen truth over comfort. And because of that, you've become a reflection of what they could be if they chose growth. That's powerful, but it's also confronting. Your presence doesn't just demand accountability from others. It also demands that you stay committed to your own growth, even when it gets uncomfortable. When you stop seeking external validation and start moving based on inner conviction, people notice. You stop people pleasing. You stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself. That kind of self-possession shifts dynamics instantly. People who used to control you with guilt or fear lose their grip. People who relied on your silence to maintain dysfunction start to feel exposed. Your presence becomes a wake-up call, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've reclaimed your power, and power that's been reclaimed, especially by someone who used to give it away freely, disrupts every room it enters. Your energy becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. But the beauty of owning your presence is that you no longer shrink in response to that discomfort. You've done the work, you know your worth, and you carry yourself like someone who refuses to go back to who they used to be just to keep others comfortable. That alone is enough to shift energy, shift conversations, and shift relationships. Without ever raising your voice, the way you carry yourself, the boundaries you uphold, the energy you walk in, it all speaks louder than words. People learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate. When your presence is rooted in self-respect, Others have no choice but to respond accordingly. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your decisions. You stop over-explaining your no. Instead, you move with clarity and conviction, and that alone draws a line. Those who thrive in confusion or manipulation will find it hard to operate around you. Your presence demands that people be clear, direct, and honest. It demands that they take responsibility for their words and actions. You become someone who doesn't entertain half-truths, passive aggression, or emotional games. And that can be intimidating, but it's also liberating. Because the more you stand in that presence, the more aligned your life becomes. The people who remain in your circle are those who value honesty, growth, and maturity. The ones who walk away were never meant to grow with you. Your presence filtered them out. There's something powerful about walking into a space and instantly setting a tone without needing to say a word. It comes from having done the inner work, from facing your own demons, and from choosing healing over hiding. That kind of presence carries weight. It speaks of discipline, resilience, and emotional intelligence. People can feel it. They may not always be able to articulate what it is, but they recognize that you're not someone they can manipulate, distract, or derail. You listen differently, you respond differently, you hold space, but you don't lose yourself doing it. That makes you rare. It also makes you a target for projection. People may assume you think you're better than them, but that's their insecurity speaking, not your truth. Your presence doesn't come from superiority, it comes from self-mastery. And in a world where many avoid that journey, your existence alone is disruptive. You walk with clarity in a culture of confusion. You move with integrity in spaces filled with facades. And just by showing up, you challenge others to examine their own path. As you continue to evolve, your energy becomes more refined. You begin to recognize when someone is operating from truth versus ego. You sense when a room shifts into alignment or chaos. Your presence becomes intuitive. You read between the lines, hear what's not being said, and respond from a place of inner peace rather than emotional reactivity. That ability doesn't just happen. It's earned through self-awareness and intentional living, and people feel it. They may not always thank you for it, but they'll remember how they felt in your presence. Some will feel seen. Others will feel exposed. Either way, you'll leave an imprint, because true presence doesn't just fill space. It changes it. It heals, corrects, awakens. It doesn't seek attention. It commands respect through authenticity. And as you walk in that, you begin to realize that accountability isn't just something you ask from others. It's something you embody. Your life becomes the evidence. Your choices become the message. And your presence becomes the permission for others to rise higher, or the conviction that pushes them to finally face themselves. When you walk in your truth consistently, you shift from needing to explain yourself to simply being yourself. That's where your true power lies. It's not in controlling others. It's not in forcing change. It's in being so anchored in your own values that others have no choice but to reevaluate theirs. You become an invitation for growth and a warning against complacency. Not everyone will appreciate that. Some will resist. Some will fall off. But the ones who stay, the ones who grow with you, are the ones who are also ready to be held accountable just like you. That's where real relationships thrive. Not in comfort, but in truth. Not in pretense, but in presence. And as you keep showing up with integrity, grace, and boldness, the world around you begins to shift. Not because your presence left it no choice. Sometimes we don't understand why certain people suddenly walk out of our lives, why relationships we valued begin to break down, or why the connections we thought would last forever start to crumble. In those moments, it can feel like betrayal, abandonment, or even punishment. But often what we perceive as loss is actually divine protection. God sees what we cannot see. He knows the conversations that happen behind closed doors, the thoughts people hide behind smiles, and the intentions wrapped in seemingly good behavior. When he removes someone from your life, it's not always because you did something wrong. It's because he sees what you don't. He sees their heart. He sees their future actions. And most importantly, he sees how their presence could derail the purpose he has planned for you. So instead of forcing doors back open that God has intentionally shut, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust that the separation is a setup for your protection. What breaks your heart today might be the very thing that saves your future. Sometimes the relationship that felt right was only right for the version of you that wasn't fully healed. fully awakened, or fully aligned with your destiny. People are placed in our lives for different reasons, and some are only meant to walk with us for a season. But when that season ends, we often try to hold on out of fear, comfort, or emotional attachment. God, however, is not concerned with our comfort. He's committed to our calling. He knows that certain individuals, while they may have played a role in your growth, can also become the weight that holds you back. Maybe they distract you with constant drama. Maybe they feed your insecurities rather than your spirit. Maybe they silently envy you and are secretly praying for your downfall. Whatever the case, when God removes them, it's not to punish them or you, it's to elevate you. He's clearing space for the people who will truly support, nurture, and honor your growth. But we often delay our blessings because we're too busy mourning what God already ended. We pray for peace, but refuse to let go of what disturbs it. We ask for purpose, then resist the pruning process required to walk in it. God's protection isn't always gentle, but it's always good. There are moments when God removes people not because they were inherently bad, but because they've simply reached the limit of their assignment in your life. You outgrew the conversations. You stopped relating to their mindset. You started healing in ways that made them uncomfortable. And rather than staying connected to someone who no longer aligns with your journey, God gently, or sometimes forcefully, creates distance. You may not understand it immediately. You may even question God's timing or judgment. But with time, you begin to see that every removal was also a release from confusion, a release from emotional entanglement, a release from being stuck in cycles that no longer served your higher purpose. God doesn't just subtract to hurt you. He subtracts to make room. And sometimes that means removing people you thought you couldn't live without, only to show you that they were blocking the very breakthrough you've been praying for. You'll look back months or years later and realize you were being protected the entire time. That unanswered text, that unexpected betrayal, that person who ghosted you, it wasn't rejection. It was redirection. There's divine wisdom in God's timing, even when we don't recognize it. We might pray for clarity, for strength, for transformation, and then become shocked when people start disappearing. But that's how God works. He answers prayers not just through blessings, but through boundaries. He knows that some people only stayed close to you because they benefited from your brokenness. When you start healing, you start threatening the very foundation that relationship was built on. When you gain clarity, you stop being so easily manipulated. And when you embrace self-worth, you stop tolerating behavior that once felt normal. So God steps in. He closes the door before you even realize it needed to be shut. He silences the noise so you can finally hear your own voice. And while it may sting, it also sets you free. You don't have to beg anyone to stay where God has clearly told them to leave. You don't have to keep extending chances to people who misuse your kindness. God will make it clear if you're willing to trust Him over your emotions. Because what feels like loneliness today is often preparation for elevation tomorrow. It's important to remember that protection doesn't always feel protective in the moment. Sometimes it feels like heartbreak, like disappointment, like confusion. You wonder why God would let someone you loved hurt you. Why He didn't stop the betrayal. But what you don't see in real time is that the betrayal revealed what you refused to see. The heartbreak became the doorway to your healing, and the confusion gave birth to a deeper connection with God. He never promised that everyone you love would love you back in the same way. But He did promise to be near to the brokenhearted. And in that closeness, He reveals purpose. He teaches you to depend on Him, not on people. He strips away the distractions so you can rediscover your identity. And through that process, your discernment sharpens. Your spirit strengthens, your confidence returns. God doesn't remove people just to teach you about them. He removes them to teach you about yourself, to remind you that your peace, your value, and your destiny do not depend on anyone staying in your life. They depend on you aligning with His plan. We often think that forgiveness and release are the same thing, but they're not. You can forgive someone and still be divinely instructed to walk away. Some people are lessons, not lifelines. God isn't asking you to carry what He already delivered you from. When He removes someone, He's saying, you've learned what you needed to learn. Now it's time to grow beyond this connection. Yet many of us cling to what's familiar because we fear the unknown. We think that letting go means losing something important. But what we don't realize is that we're actually making room for the right people. The ones who will pour into you without draining you. The ones who can handle your growth without feeling threatened. The ones sent by God, not just convenient for the moment. But you won't receive those connections if you keep reattaching yourself to what God has already cut off. He removes people not out of cruelty, but out of compassion. He knows that your destiny can't be fulfilled if you keep circling the same emotional wilderness with the same people who keep wounding you. The truth is, spiritual growth often demands emotional separation. You can't heal in the same environment that hurt you, and God knows that. He loves you too much to let you stay stuck in places where your soul is suffocating. That's why he intervenes. That's why he allows the distance, the silence, the fallouts. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're being preserved. Think about it. How many times have you looked back and realized that a painful goodbye was actually the greatest blessing? That the loss made you stronger, wiser, and more connected to your purpose? That's the pattern. That's the protection. God will remove what threatens your peace, your focus, and your assignment, and he won't always give you the explanation up front. Sometimes all you get is the separation, but in that space, he will also give you clarity, healing, and vision. It's in the stillness after the storm that you realize who you are without the weight of people who were never meant to stay. And once you've tasted that freedom, you'll stop chasing what God has already removed. As painful as it is, separation is often God's way of sanctification. He's setting you apart. He's refining you. And part of that refinement is recognizing that not everyone can go where you're going. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. You're being strengthened for the next level of your calling, and that level demands a new level of discernment. Some connections were built on brokenness, on shared trauma, on insecurity. But now that you're healing, those connections don't fit anymore. They feel forced. They feel heavy. That's not a coincidence. It's a sign. God is signaling that it's time to rise. Time to elevate, time to surround yourself with people who see you, value you, and walk with you in purpose. And that might mean walking alone for a season. But don't mistake solitude for abandonment. Sometimes God isolates you so he can speak to you without interference, so he can pour into you without distraction. And so that when he finally sends the right people, you'll be ready, not needy. You'll welcome them from a place of wholeness, not desperation. And that's what divine protection is really about, preserving the version of you that's aligned with heaven's purpose, not just your emotions. Eventually, you'll come to see that God's removals are just as holy as his blessings, that the people who left, the relationships that ended, and the doors that closed were all a part of a greater plan. You'll stop resenting the endings and start recognizing the grace in them, because you'll realize that God was never trying to hurt you. He was trying to free you, to liberate you from false attachments, from toxic cycles, from stagnant situations. And in that freedom, you'll find your voice again. You'll find your strength again. You'll find your identity not in who stayed, but in who you became when you learned to stand alone with God. So when people exit your life unexpectedly, don't panic, pause, pray, trust. Because if God is removing them, he's protecting you. And if he's protecting you, it means there's something greater on the way. Something that aligns with your calling, honors your growth, and respects the purpose he placed within you. Let go. Not because you want to, but because you trust the one who knows the end from the beginning. In life, the people who leave us often create the deepest wounds, but those wounds are not without purpose. What may feel like a painful loss is often divine intervention, a way of shielding us from harm we didn't even see coming. God's love is protective, not passive. He removes people from your path not to break you down, but to build you up. When you ask him for peace, for purpose, for clarity, he may answer not by adding more to your life, but by subtracting what no longer serves you. Every closed door is not a punishment, but a blessing. Every exit isn't rejection, it's redirection. The people who couldn't stay were never meant to carry the weight of your destiny. Their removal is not evidence of your failure, but proof of your growth. Sometimes you have to lose what was familiar to find what's truly aligned with your soul. When God intervenes and takes someone out of your life, it's an act of divine mercy. He sees the future you don't, hears the conversations you can't, and feels the intentions hidden behind the smiles. That sudden silence, that unexpected fallout, it's his way of pulling you out of the fire before it burns you. It's not about being unloved, it's about being preserved. God won't let who you were hold hostage who you're becoming. And as you grow, as you heal, and as you transform, some connections simply won't survive the evolution. Let them go in peace. Not because you're bitter, but because you've outgrown the space they once held in your life. You don't need to fight for places you've outgrown. You just need to trust that God knows what he's doing. In that trust, you'll find peace. You'll stop begging for explanations and start walking in faith. You'll stop clinging to what was and begin preparing for what's ahead. When God removes someone, he always replaces what's lost with something greater, more aligned, more pure, more purposeful. You just have to be willing to let go of what's no longer meant for you. Don't let temporary emotions sabotage eternal progress. You're not being left behind, you're being lifted up. Sometimes God closes doors so loudly it shakes your entire world, but it's only because he's shifting you into a space where your gifts, your voice, and your calling can thrive. So take heart in the separation. Rest in the knowing that God is not done with you. He's simply removing distractions so that you can see clearly, walk boldly, and rise fully into who you were created to be. It's not the end of something beautiful. It's the beginning of something divine. Keep trusting, keep healing, and keep moving forward. Thank you for listening. May you walk in peace, guided by faith and protected by grace. Hallelujah. God bless you.